right, you can be seated. And you can open up to Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17. So the last couple weeks we've been covering the 7 bowl judgments. We said these 7 bowl judgments, they depict the culmination of God's judgment against unbelievers. So that number 7, full. This is the full judgment of God that comes upon the unbelieving world. And so with those plagues, the judgment upon unbelievers in terms of world history is actually complete. All right, so that's it for them, if you will. But John's revelation, of course, not yet complete. There's yet to come, of course, of the revelation of the saints' reward, Christ's return, the new heavens, the new earth. But before we come to that glorious vision, God sees it fit that we kind of get more detail of the judgment of the world. Right? We see the destruction of Babylon. So Babylon here is depicted figuratively, representing the city of man, the world that is opposed to God. And because of that opposition, it therefore persecutes God's people. So we know, of course, Babylon, the earthly Babylon, is kind of gone, destroyed. But the spirit of Babylon continues. And so the spirit of Babylon meaning, well, the kingdom of the world, the rule of man, the rule of the world as opposed to the rule of God. We notice that within Babel itself, and then, of course, the people of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar, their rule. But that spirit of opposition towards God, it continues in it. And you can say the spirit of Babylon has been with us since Babylon, right? So that spirit of Babylon comes through pretty much any human empire. It came through Rome. It comes through others. And so that really is what's being destroyed. That's what's being destroyed by God. In Revelation chapter 17, we kind of see that it's really about the allurement, if you will, of the world. How Satan, dresses up the world in order to make it look appealing. All right, so Satan makes the things of sin. He makes the things of the world. He makes them look appealing to us, and in some sense, they are. The Bible says that sin is pleasurable for a season, right? But then it brings about destruction. But of course, Satan doesn't tempt mankind. He doesn't tempt Christians and tell us that, the things of the world, the things of sin, that they end poorly. He only shows us what looks appealing and what looks good. And so he's been doing that, of course, since the garden, trying to make the apple or whatever fruit it was, right? To make it look appealing to the woman, to make it look appealing to the man. Of course, he didn't speak of what it would bring, death and destruction and the fall of man. But he's always been doing that in terms of the world, right? Making it look appealing to us. But what we're going to see is in Revelation chapter 17, that facade, that false appeal that he brings concerning the world, it really gets revealed to us what the world actually is like, what it actually is in terms of opposition towards God. Instead of being beautiful and appealing and wonderful, it's actually very dark and ugly and disgusting. Even described, as we're going to see in chapter 17, described as a harlot, described as a prostitute. Whorish, actually, is what we're going to read about here in Revelation chapter 17. And that's actually really good for us to see and to understand as Christians, right? Because obviously the world can be appealing to us, and we can get a sense of the heaviness of the world and Satan trying to draw us away from God and to participate in the sins of the world. If we're Christians and we're alive and we have a pulse, then we all feel that. We've all felt that heaviness before, the heaviness of the pool of the world, to join it, to participate in its sins. And so we need a revelation, right? This is why we have this revelation, right? We need a revelation to see what is actually there. What does it actually look like? So let me just give a quick example. I think I come back to this later in the sermon, but a quick idea of what I'm kind of talking about and getting at is when you think about a place like Las Vegas, it's made to appear wonderful, beautiful, big, right? Beautiful. The streets, they want to keep the streets clean. They want it. It's a big facade of just wealth and prosperity and beauty and greatness. And of course, that's what they're trying to sell. Like, these are the best things of the world. We want you to come in from all over the world to take part in what we consider to be the best things of the world. But we understand that that city has a very dark underbelly. What does it actually look like spiritually, right? Not just physically to the eye. What does it look like spiritually? Well, spiritually, it looks like it's very greedy. There's a lot of sexual immorality there. There's a lot of perversity there. There's probably a lot more darkness than we should even know about, right? There's a lot more darkness than we even know about. But that's what it really actually looks like. The darkness, the underbelly, the evil. That's what God sees from heaven when he looks down. And it's not just true of Las Vegas. What the scripture, what the passage is telling us, that's actually true of the world, the worldly system, anything that is opposed to God. And so we need to have this revelation to warn us, to open up our eyes, to remind us, right, to be in the world, but not to be of the world. And when you read a passage like Revelation chapter 17, you kind of can't help but feel the kind of the heaviness and the sense of evil. The way it's being described, we're going to definitely see that as we read through the passage. But that's good for us. We want to get a sense of, this is kind of filthy. This is kind of gross, what's being described here. And that's true because we're talking about the fallen world. We're talking about sinful humanity. And so we need to understand these things in order to avoid it and to stay away. A parallel passage to this one in Revelation chapter 17 is 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, which we understand is a lot of what we're talking about here. Of course, the same author, John the Apostle, writing, he says there in 1 John, he says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world," and what is in the world? What's actually there, right? Not just beauty and nice things and pleasure and joy. What's actually in the world? For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And then he says this, "And the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever." So really, we at the end of Revelation here, we're coming towards the end. This is what we see. Revelation 17 is about the world passing away. Excuse me. Revelation 18 is the same thing. Fallen, fallen is Babylon. We'll look at that next week. What is that about? It's about the world that's passing away. So it's a picture of that actually taking place, the passing away of the world. And then whoever does the will of God, though, abides forever. So you could say that those are the following chapters in Revelation where we get the people of God dwelling with God forever. Excuse me. So what we're going to see then in chapter 17, later on in chapter 18, is a description of the judgment and the fall of mankind, described as Babylon. One could say that chapter 16 focused more on unbelievers being judged and not repenting, but chapter 17 here focuses more on the city being judged. The idea is that, well, without a city, there's no more place for the unbeliever to dwell on the earth. back to our analogy of Las Vegas, right? Imagine if Las Vegas was destroyed. Well, now there's no more place for the wicked to go and to gamble, to commit idolatry, to commit sexual immoralities, all the other vices that are associated with the city, right? There would be a real mourning, right, if somehow Las Vegas was destroyed by all the people who want to participate in its sins, right? And so the idea is with the city destroyed, their end is certain. There's no place for us anymore upon the earth. And that would make sense, right? There's no more place for us on the earth because it's God's earth, right? It's God's earth, and so he is going to renew it and restore it. And so with Babylon destroyed, the wicked have no place on earth. Their doom is certain, and God reigns. This is the testimony of Revelation chapter 17. That's what this is about. All right, so we'll begin by reading through the first 6 verses. You can look there. Then it says, "Then one of the 7 angels who had 7 bowls came and said to me, 'Come, and I will show you the judgment,'" right? "The judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations." You see the idea of darkness, filthiness, right? Earth's abominations in this cup. "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." Now this woman, is clearly different than the woman that was mentioned in chapter 12, who we find also in a wilderness. This time, the woman, the prostitute, is in the wilderness for judgment. In Revelation chapter 12, the woman, that represented the church. But here in chapter 17, the woman represents the Antichrist, or all that is opposed to Christ. So basically, we have, like we have throughout most of Revelation, is we have a counterfeit to the woman in Revelation chapter 12. As we've seen throughout the book, Satan has all these counterfeits to the things of God to deceive the people of the earth. And as we consider the world, right, what's this idea? Why is it a woman that's being used here? Well, as we consider the world, it looks attractive, right? Like an attractive woman. But what we see here is what the world really looks like. Not just simply an attractive woman, but as it says, a great prostitute, right? A prostitute in this passage is one that is married and has been false to her husband's bed, has forsaken the guide of her youth, broken the covenant of God. And it says that she had been a prostitute to the kings of the earth, whom she had intoxicated with the wine of her fornication. All right? So you kind of get the idea of in prostitution, it makes sense that a lot of times wine or strong drink is a part of the activity, right? And here it's no different. But what we're going to see though is that this is obviously not like a physical thing, but it's a spiritual description. All right, so first let's look, we're going to see how she is clothed and how she is adorned. All right, it says she was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. All right, so purple, color for royalty is very expensive color, right? So only royalty could really afford this. And then there's that scarlet color mentioned. Here we're all the allurements of worldly honor and riches, decked with gold, precious stones, pearls, right? All the allurements of worldly honor, pomp, and pride, all the things that are suited to sensual and worldly minds, right? What is impressive? What is attractive to the world? Gold, right? Precious stones, pearls. These are the things that the world finds important and valuable, and she has them. She's full of them, right? Right, this is quite different than the adornment that the Apostle Peter says that godly women should possess, right? 1 Peter chapter 3, he says, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing that you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. So God finds those things precious. God finds those things valuable, the internal person. But what the world finds impressive and important and valuable is only the outward things, and this is what this prostitute is adorned with. This woman, of course, that's being described is anything but, gentle and quiet. She wants to be seen, right? She is loud and obstinate. She is more like Lady Folly in the book of Proverbs than Lady Wisdom. And so, even just reading over Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly in the book of Proverbs, I think gives us a good sense of what this, apocalyptic vision is trying to get at for us. Right? And she's holding in her hand something, right? She's holding in her hand a golden cup that's full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. So she has a golden cup like a queen, like a ruler, but her cup is not filled with, good wine. It's filled with deceptive wine, as we're told here. Right? And once again, this idea of, the immorality, it's not primarily referring to sexual sin, even though that's often accompanied with idolatry, but it's focused on idolatry. She causes people to turn away from the worship of the one true God and instead to worship idols, to worship things created by the hands of men. And of course, obviously, the physical sin of sexual immorality often follows the sin of idolatry. And so, notice how this woman being described here, it probably reminds you of Jezebel in the Old Testament. That would be a good thing to come to mind, right? Jezebel, who was married to Ahab, the king, and she was beautiful, and she was a queen, and no doubt she had a golden cup, but she turned the heart of Ahab and the people of Israel, she turned their hearts to worship Baal, a false god. You could say that she was holding in her hand a golden cup that was full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. Right? Remember, she also had the prophets of God hunted down and killed. Right? She's like a miniature picture of the prostitute that we see here in Revelation chapter 17. Right? So what do I mean by a miniature picture? Well, she's like a representative of this prostitute here, but when it's describing the prostitute Babylon here, it's obviously not reserved to just one queen or one person, but it's to the spirit of false prophecy. It's to that false spirit, if you will, that's in Jezebel and that's in the world that deters people from worshiping God and encourages them to pick up idolatry and all these things. All of those people can be described, right? And this is the idea of Babylon that is being described. So Satan was behind Jezebel, and he's behind the Antichrist and Babylon, the unbelieving world. All right, so then we notice her seat and residence, right, where she's sitting. Well, she's sitting upon the beast, it says, that had 7 heads and 10 horns. That is to say Rome, as we will look at this later. Rome was known as the city of 7 hills, the city on 7 hills. It was infamous for idolatry and tyranny and blasphemy, right? And so it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? The spirit of Babylon, it doesn't go away when Babylon is destroyed, hundreds, 1,000 years ago. It continues on. That spirit of Babylon continues on, and you see that spirit of Babylon in the city of Rome. And so her seat then is upon the mightiest empire of the earth at the time of John's writing, which would have been Rome. And so why does Rome persecute the church? Well, because Satan is controlling it, and his control is through the seduction of a prostitute. Excuse me. In other words, right, it looks good to the world. It looks appealing. It comes with great reward, like gold and silver. It is pleasurable, but they do not know, right? Rome did not know, that Satan was the one who was behind it. They did not know that it leads to death and to destruction. And so her name then, as well, it mentions, was written on her forehead. She is named from her place of residence. It says here, Babylon the Great. But that we might not take it to be the old Babylon literally, we're told that it is a mystery, right? It is some other great city resembling the old Babylon. So, as we said, right, it's referring to Rome. So she's named from her infamous way and practice, right? Not only a harlot, it says, but a mother of harlot. It's breeding up other harlots, nursing them and training them up to idolatry and all sorts of lewdness and wickedness, right? So, in other words, it's like the parent and the nurse of all false religion and filthy conversation. The idea of, Rome is a city of gods, like Greece was, right? Greece was a city of the gods, the pantheon of gods. Rome, took up those gods and started worshiping them as well. And guess what Rome did? They added more gods. And so they disseminate all of this false worship where? All over the empire, which means all over the known world, right? So that's how they are the mother of harlots, right? Let's train the world, in other words, in idolatry, in this practice. And of course, they did. So this is what's being described here. And this, this spirit of Babylon, if you will, she trained up Jezebel those many years ago, but there have been many more Jezebels after him. She trained up Babylon to cause the people of Israel to stumble and to sin. And a way for us to think about it is, she's trained up Muhammad in order to teach his false message to the world. She's trained up the Buddhists and the Sikhs and the papacy, right? In any and all false religions. All right, so this prostitute that's being described has trained up all of the false religions of the earth to spread their harlotry, as the scriptures are describing it, right? Their harlotry to the world. Now, the most appalling, so we're getting a sense then of what's going on here, but the most appalling thing about the prostitute isn't just so much, the idolatry, which of course is bad and evil and wicked. But the most appalling thing about the prostitute here is actually her diet, what she eats. She ate and satiated herself, it says, with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. So the worst thing, it's kind of like the worst thing that happens with this prostitute is what she eats, what she drinks. She drank their blood with such greediness that she is intoxicated. She has intoxicated herself with it. Right? In other words, right, it was so pleasant to her that she could not tell when she had enough of it. Right? She was satiated by the blood of the saints, but never satisfied. So well, it's like, well, what is this? What could this possibly mean to me? Well, even just go back and think about in the gladiators of Rome, and as of course they would put the Christians into the arena, and the blood of the Christians would be spilled. What would the Roman people do as they witnessed these things? Well, they would cheer, right? So they would rejoice at the killing and the persecution of Christians in the arena. This is what it's getting at here, right? As when it talks about the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus and them drinking their blood. Okay, obviously they weren't literally drinking their blood, but what it's saying is they enjoyed when the Christians' blood was spilled. They enjoyed it, they rejoiced in it, and here it is, they couldn't get enough of it, right? They couldn't get enough of it. So, are we getting a sense of the grotesqueness here? I think we are, right? We're getting a sense of the darkness of the evil, right? It is a grotesque image. All of these blasphemies and sins were bad enough, but they culminate in the persecutions of the saints. Right? In our minds, right, my mind at least, right, went all the way back to even Cain. Right? So his sacrifice, we think about Cain and Abel, his sacrifice was not done in faith, Cain's, and therefore was unacceptable to God. But his worst sin, right, that wasn't his worst sin. His worst sin then was the shedding of the blood of his brother Abel. And why did he shed his blood, we're told? Well, because his deeds were righteous, because Abel's deeds were righteous. Why does the prostitute shed the blood of the saints? Why is there rejoicing at the blood of the martyrs? Why can't they get enough of it? Why is that? Right? It's because the saints, the Christians, do not participate in her sins. They do not worship the false gods. Because their deeds are righteous, and she hates this above all, right? She hates this, that they won't participate in her sins. They're not getting drunk off of her wine. They're not participating in her idolatry. They're not participating in her, sexual immoralities, because they keep themselves unstained and unspotted from the world. They live out a righteous life, and therefore the prostitute hates this and wants to kill it, right? And so when I say the prostitute, what I'm saying is, well, that's the world. The world hates that because the church is not participating in her sins. And why is that? Well, part of that reality is because it's a poor reflection upon themselves, right? When the church is not participating in their sins, when it's living out a righteous life, when it's living as the light of the world, it sheds truth upon themselves that, oh wow, we are corrupt. We live in darkness while they live in the light. And instead of repenting and turning to God, they say, we hate that, right? Let's stomp out that light. Let's destroy that light. So this is a picture then, Revelation chapter 17 then, is a picture simply of what is really going on in the world, even today. What is really going on in the world? All right, so we turn on Netflix or we open up the internet and we see the evil then all around us, right? There's a bunch of vile things all around us, but the world, it dresses it up. It tries to make it look good, make it look appealing, make it look like no big deal. It tries to make it look attractive and appealing. But here, what we see in Revelation chapter 17 is what the godless world really is, what it really looks like. It looks like a prostitute, a great prostitute. It looks like darkness. It looks like a cup full of abominations and evil, right? There is the persecution of the saints, the spilling of their blood. This is what actually things are. One of the ways that one of the things that come to mind as I think about this is like, whenever, I don't necessarily watch the Grammys or award shows, but you think about an award show. I was seeing the pictures of the Met Gala. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Met Gala, but that's where they, get dressed in their, their fancy dresses and things like that. Right? They get, it's very important to the world. They get dressed in the finest of dresses in their own minds. But the idea is this: is they put on an incredible show. It's supposed to look great. It's supposed to look amazing. It's supposed to be the talk of the town, right? All the tabloids are talking about it. All the websites are talking about it. It's such a big deal. It's so important what people are wearing. It's made to look great. Or you think about the award shows. It's made to look great and amazing. But we know what these people believe and what they support, and there's always agenda about, what they're supporting and what they believe. And of course, it always has to do with something very vile and evil and what the world does. All right? And so in other words, what it supports and what their agenda is it's actually very dark and very evil. And what God is doing in Revelation chapter 17, what this unveiling is for us to see, here's what it actually is in the sight of God. It isn't, the beautiful appearance. It isn't the beautiful buildings and the beautiful dresses and, the expensive food and all of these things that they're trying to make you see and say, oh, isn't this great and amazing? It's like, no, there's actually a very dark underbelly. It's actually very wicked. It's full of abominations. This is what it actually is. And so this is what Revelation 17 is doing for us. And it goes on to say then, when I saw her, so when John sees her, I saw her, I marveled greatly. Verse 7. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. So John seems to marvel because he does not quite understand who this prostitute and beast was. It's a symbolic image, and like us, he may be there, right, scratching his head, like, what is it that I'm actually seeing here in this vision? And perhaps he's also marveling because it seems that the prostitute has defeated the saints, right, because she's taking in their blood. But the angel, though, here is going to tell him the mystery of the woman and the beast. Let me explain to you what you're seeing. Now, it's funny, right, because he explains it, and if you're like me, you're probably still thinking, what on earth is he talking about? So here's the explanation, the mystery, but it's still hard to understand. This passage is definitely one of the more difficult passages in all of the book of Revelation to interpret. So a lot of ink has been written to describe what this, may possibly refer to. One thing virtually everybody agrees on, though, is that, Rome is in view in some capacity. It is the new Babylon, as we've talked about. A world empire filled with idolatry, opposed to the things of God. And we also see that the idolatry and cruelty, it says here, it arises from the bottomless pit. And it will go back there, right? So it rises from the bottomless pit. In other words, right, it is a product of hell, and it shall return there in judgment. All of the idolatry, all the filthiness, all the abominations, all the persecutions, what is its source? Its source is the pit of hell. Its source is hell. The source is Satan. And it will be judged, and God will send it back there in his judgment. All right, and then what about these kings, right? Now, some take these kings to be Roman empires or emperors, or even as successive empires that have persecuted the church of God. Some take the 8th king to be the Roman papacy, or the Pope, to whom the 10 kings or the nations of the earth give their allegiance. That's pretty reasonable interpretation. Others take a view, though, that's a bit more general, something like this. So throughout history, totalitarian regimes have gone against the people of God. And there are periods where it looks as if the power of those empires will not return, as if the beast is not. But the beast, which refers to totalitarian power, government power, it always rises again. It may seem dead, yet the beast rises from the ashes and inflicts misery upon the saints again. And this will be the pattern throughout history until the end arrives. That view basically seems a bit more likely to me. Basically, it's kind of like this. If you go all the way back to Babel, right, and God, this is mankind coming together to be opposed to God, to make a name for themselves. What does God do? God judges it, right? God judges Babel and he scatters the people. And so it's almost as though the world looks around and says, okay, well, here's something that was, but it no longer is. But there's a return, if you will, of the city of man. Man comes back together and builds again, right? So, well, the city of man is built again through Babylon and through Assyria and through other world powers and through Rome. And it's like, okay, we couldn't really trust in man for a while, but now we can trust in man again because there's been a return of the greatness of man, the glory of Rome, okay? And you think about nations upon the earth. Nations kind of, they ebb and flow in terms of their greatness. We've talked about this before. We could look at a nation like Germany. We could say, oh, well, there's not much to trust here because they've been destroyed. But then they make a comeback. They get powerful again. All right? So the kingdoms of the earth, they get powerful. They get destroyed. They get judged. God judges them, brings them low. But then they rise again. And they rise again in terms of their, not just in terms of their power, but they rise again in terms of their idolatry. They rise again in terms of their persecution towards the saints. And so that seems to be what's being communicated here in these passages. And so the rulers of the world then are predisposed to exercise their own power, and they're infamous for their stubbornness and their pride. And then we see in this passage, right, in this, what we just read, they then find themselves coming together. And they are harmonious in giving their power and authority to the beast. To the beast. In other words, right, they would rather have Satan rule them than Christ. And as we've said before, they do not know it is a beast to whom they are giving their authority to. They simply think it's their own authority. But they do not know that they're under the power of another. They do not know when there's a rejection of Christ from the kingdoms of the world, right? When there's a rejection of Christ, they do not know they're giving their power to the beast. They are under the power of Satan and they don't recognize it. But this is a revelation for us, the church, so that we can see it. That their opposition towards God causes them to make war on the Lamb. This is what happens, verse 14. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. Right? How do they make war on a Lamb who is ascended and at the right hand of God? Well, by shedding the blood of the saints. This is how they make war on the Lamb, by persecuting the church. But the good news for us as the church is that, well, the Lamb will conquer them. And it says, why? Well, why will he conquer them? Well, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. His power and his might are much greater than theirs. Even though they come together and are harmonious in their persecution towards the church, they are up against the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Think about when Abraham went up against the kings of the earth to rescue Lot. Who was the one who was at an advantage? Abraham, the lone person, against all the kings of the earth, the mightiest of the kings of the earth in those days. Who was at an advantage? Well, Abraham was, of course, because the Lord was on his side. Or think about the people of Israel against Pharaoh and his chariots. Who had the advantage in that episode? Well, of course, it was Israel, of course, right? And the same is true for us today. This is what it's getting at here, right? It is the church up against the rulers of the world who are opposed to God. Who has the advantage? Who has the advantage? We who, we don't carry weapons, right? We're not in here preparing for battle with weapons and things of that nature, but we're up against the rulers of the world who have the weapons, who have the authority, who have the prisons. But who has the advantage? Well, the church does. Why? Well, because God is on our side. And as we are told here, we are on his side, the side of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. All right, closing out the chapter here. And the angel said to me, verse 15, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages, and the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So we were told in verse 1 that the prostitute sits on many waters, and now the angel reveals to John the meaning and the significance of those waters. The waters, they stand for many people groups and languages. In other words, right, the harlot's rule, it covers the earth. She has deceived the nations. The 10 horns, which are the 10 kings ruling alongside the beast, are filled with hatred against, surprisingly, right, the harlot. So it seems the rulers of the empire are turning against, right, the economic and religious centers of their society. So they turn against the harlot that is deceptive. The kings are animated by hatred, and thus they destroy the prostitute who ends up desolate and naked, destroyed by fire. Right? Hatred is irrational and demonic. What's happening here is that evil is imploding upon itself. It is inherently self-destructive. The city of man will collapse under the weight of its own evil and hate. There's a turning against one another, right? The idea of no honor among thieves. There's no loyalty under satanic rule. False religion produces no unity. So the destruction of the enemy is self-destruction. This is part of God's judgment. And so the desire of the 10 kings and the beast to destroy the harlot is ultimately from God. And so they're carrying out his purpose and his will. And God's done this before with enemies, right? Remember when Gideon fights in his battle, how do the enemies, how do they get destroyed? By killing themselves, by fighting against themselves. And so we're reminded here that God rules over history, that evil empires and kings, though they're culpable for the evil that they are carrying out, they're still never outside of the hand of God, right? Nor should they boast as if they accomplish anything apart from God's purposes. And then the identity of the woman is now disclosed. And we're told that she represents a city. Rome here represents the city of man that's opposed to the things of God, which John's original audience, they would have been experiencing this firsthand. And at the same time, right, this moniker Babylon suggests that what is said here, it transcends Rome. It represents all cultures and cities of the world that are opposed to the things of God. So in this chapter, we see a trinity of evil powers, right? The beast, the 10 kings, and the wicked and brazen harlot. the evil practice, especially by the harlot, is shocking to us, right? The blood of the saints is shed by the prostitute while she pursues a life of glamour and luxury. John reminds us, however, that evil will not triumph. Evil finally turns upon itself and it implodes. And so the unity present at the beginning, right? There was a coalition, they came together of this evil plan. It dissolves into mutual hatred. We live, the implosion of evil, it's not just a human reality though, right? It's God who's orchestrating it, God's purposes. So we live in God's world, and we live in his world, and he steers history according to his purposes. Even when evil it's doing is worst, God is directing the outcome. God is directing it. This is what we're being told. And so we know the final story. We know how it ends. The Lamb wins, and because we are with him, we, the church, we also win. This is what's being said in Revelation chapter 17. All right, if you will, please bow your head with me in prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, we come before you, and we come to shocking passages, Lord, which are descriptive and grotesque, but there's also just a very simple message. A simple message that, well, we find the world coming up against the people of God as it is done throughout the history of the world, but that you, Lord, are on our side. And that even though there's a battle against the Lamb, that you will win because you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So, Father, we pray and ask that you would help us to get a clearer understanding of this vision. Help us to see, even though it's symbolic and hard and strange at times, Lord, help us to see that you are the one directing history, that you are the one who will cause the judgment to fall upon the world, and that you will reign victorious. And so we pray and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.